So I wanted to have you on to discuss the roofer response to Hurricane Idalia.
When you get south of Georgia and you hit that line, the rules change when you get to Florida.
I want to do a live react to this storm, this direction here.
At the request of a homeowner, as a roofer, realize that you're not there to talk about, what should or shouldn't be approved, right?
All right, y'all, we're coming to you live, talking about Hurricane Idalia, and I've got Matt Spanton on with me. You've had a lot of experience working these storms in the past, talking to lots of roofers in the area, and last time we talked about this, so I wanted to have you on to discuss the roofer response to Hurricane Idalia. The first question I've got is the most obvious one. What should roofers be thinking about and looking at if they're considering coming to Florida to work a storm?
Florida's a different landscape than chasing hailstorms. We talked about this. I feel like this is Groundhog Day. This is
yeah.
We had the same talk, right?
Yes.
The claim processes here, the overall landscape that we work down here is totally different. And so this isn't chasing a storm like run into a hailstorm in Dallas or Denver, or, Minnesota. You have to have deep pockets and you have to be patient. And so what I would tell anybody who's thinking about coming here right now, and I've gotten a ton of calls, and, we're ramping up some residential services as well with a group of guys that are coming on board, is to be patient. Haste makes waste. Fast money isn't always good money. And there are an awful lot of people who ran down here after Ian that left not long after, broke with their tails between their legs to get to the next hailstorm. And that's because they didn't allow the storm cycle to really take place. And so
tell me what you mean by that.
Well, the claim process down here and the actual building process is slow. And so while you could come down here and you can run out and you can tarp roofs and, you can go get some mitigation money, even that money is going to be not right on tap. Right. So, the Florida insurance laws now are totally different. The carriers here play a little bit of a different game. And it's a slow burn process. So, you have an awful lot of work still wide open down in Southwest Florida just because of this reason. And you have to be patient with it, and you have to have the money to be able to wait on the claim process. If you go to a hailstorm, guys are making money, in the typical claim cycle, depending on how, their commission structures or their pay is, right? But typically, you can get into a hailstorm, sell jobs, build the jobs, and be making money within 3 to 6 weeks at the worst case, right? You come down to a hurricane, especially in Florida, you could be looking at 4 to 6 months before you see these jobs really actually turn into anything where guys are making money. And so if you don't have a bankroll to be able to live that way, and to be able to fund your operation and to, just stay afloat, it can sink you really quick. The difference is, right now it is almost September. And so if people make a jump to come down and they're not well funded and they're not patient, they can find themselves at Christmas time in a really tricky bind.
Yeah. And sometimes you're talking about companies, and sometimes you're talking about salespeople that jump into new companies, right? And you don't always, I think sometimes they come into companies where they don't always know what they're jumping into. It feels like we want to have a somber tone here, obviously, because there's going to be some very negative things that happen. I'm never gleeful about crazy storms. That's never, to me, it's not that exciting. However, it is news. We need to talk about it. But I see salespeople sometimes jump into new companies thinking of it as a gold rush. Do you know what I mean? In these situations, and you just don't know. What's nice about when you work a local area for a long time is that the owner, the ethics of the company, and how this is going to turn out. There's certainty a little bit, and with hurricanes and large hailstorms, sometimes roofing salespeople throw that all out the window.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about who you do come work for, right? There's, a group of guys can go up and do okay in a hailstorm in Chicago, and that owner can do okay, and he can run the business fine. There's a lot of room for error there, but down here there's not. And so if you're not partnered up with the right group, you're not partnered up with the right person, somebody who has the experience, somebody who's honestly weathered the storm down here, who's done multiple hurricanes, who's seen kind of the good, bad, and the ugly, right? And what the actual cycle looks like in it. You're putting all your eggs in the basket with that company. And I've seen it many, many times. There's some companies now that did the complete opposite, Tim, of what we talked about last time.
I saw that. I actually watched that. And I was like, Matt Spanton said not to do exactly what I'm seeing.
I don't know how many times I had people call me like, dude, you were dead set. You were right. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm not doomsaying anything for anybody, because I don't want people to come and make money. I want everybody to prosper and be abundant. Like, I mean, I'm all about that life. But when you get south of Georgia and you hit that line, the rules change when you get to Florida. And it's not to say there's not a lot of money to be made and a great life to be made. I moved my whole family here to Florida. It's primarily where I work. I mean, I do work all over the country, but primarily where I do business is in Florida. But it is just a different landscape, and guys need to be aware of it, because they got kids at home, they got wives at home. Everybody's kind of counting on this move they're going to make. And before they take that calculated risk, they need to look at all the factors, right? And the factors is that, it's a longer, slower burn. And specifically now, before Ian, there were some insurance laws that were enacted. And it really, really changed the landscape of what guys can do, who they can work with, what they can say, how the roofs are approved and looked at, on code bases.
Can you give us a little cliff notes on that? Because I know, I know that there's a lot that's changed, but like, what are some of the things that have really stuck out to you?
The big thing is the AOB law has changed drastically. There is some different takes on that, right? You can use an AOB. We use AOB. We do a lot of large loss, right? So we do a lot of resorts and large condominium, communities. And so with that, we're often tethered with an attorney, right, who's handling kind of the legal side of it. And so we use an AOB a lot of times in the correct format. But if you're coming down here to go, try to do, 500, 1,000, 2,000 roofs, and you're coming with a team of guys, to send those guys out armed with AOBs who don't know the legal ramifications of saying or doing things a certain way, the milestones that need to be met after you sign that AOB and what needs to be produced and followed up on, you could get yourself in a world of hurt. So that changed drastically, right? There's no discussing claim process or policy details with the carriers at all. So while you can certainly meet an adjuster out on a property at the request of a homeowner, as a roofer, realize that you're not there to talk about what should or shouldn't be approved, right? Perfect example. As a roofer, I can tell you that, well, that shingle is damaged. Clearly, we can see it's gone. And in order for me to be able to replace it, here's the process I have to take, right? So I can talk about that. But as soon as I dip into any policy language, or as soon as I dip into anything on the actual adjustment law side of things, then that's a red flag, right? And if you have the wrong adjuster, which, if you have any adjuster who's, kind of anti-roofer or wants to, be a stickler, they can report you, and then they can start running down that rabbit hole.
Contractors love the catch-all because it makes every single one of their roof builds easier and more profitable. Protective netting wraps facade and landscaping to prevent from left-behind nails and damage. Homeowner referrals bring you more jobs, and insurance supplements bring you more profits. But my favorite part, the branding.
Now, I've seen some very smart roofers. I've shadowed them, talking to adjusters. One of my favorite, and you tell me if this would fly there or not. I'm feeling they might not, to be honest, but I've seen them, like, for instance, somebody who used to be an adjuster, who's a salesperson, telling stories. Oh, I've seen something like this before. Like, in my day when I was an adjuster, this would obviously pass completely. And I understand how difficult it is these days, with some of the things they're enacting. You know what I'm saying? Like where you're telling stories to kind of prime the adjuster.
The big thing now, Tim, right down here is you can't induce an insurance claim in any way, right? So you can go inspect the roof, you can come down and you can say, hey, listen, here's what I found. Here's the pictures. Here's the shingles blown off. Here's the hail damage, whatever it is, right? But when you get to the point to where it typically used to be, okay, so based on what I've seen and my knowledge of insurance claims, you may qualify for a roof replacement based on your carrier and your policy, right? Or on your claim policy.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore, right? Okay. Because as soon as you say you qualify or based like you're in adjustment. But what I've heard some guys have done that makes sense is to say, okay, well, here's the damage on your roof. And based on the fact that I'm a roofing contractor, if you were asking me what the best means to replace is, to repair this roof would cost me more than it would to just replace it. And so there's a few different ways that we can go about that method of replacing your roof. I can write you an estimate and you can just grab your Visa out, right, and get your miles and swipe it and we can replace the roof. There's some funding options that we have, right? We work with some banks and we can get you some low interest funding. Plug for Chris Schofield if he wants to get in.
Yeah. Schofield, baby.
Yeah. Or Bill down the street decided he called his insurance company to see if they'd pick it up. They came out and looked at it. They agreed it is that damage to where it needed to be replaced from their storm, so it qualified under his policy. And they actually wrote him a check to get his roof replaced. And so that's kind of, I think that's a very fair way to explain it all and to still stay in bounds and not step on the laws, the carrier's toes, the adjuster's toes. I mean, I just think that that's a good way to explain it and still stay in the
Yeah. I like that. Smart. I want to do a live react to the storm direction here. It looks like it's hitting north. That's the storm path. If you kind of look at that, you were talking to me a little bit about how even though if it's not hitting these like super dense areas as far as like houses, that sometimes it's and I hate to put it this way, better for roofers, but I'm saying like you're saying less, like if they weren't hit last time, then there might be more actual roof damage is the point of what I'm getting at here. Can you talk us through a little bit about what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Yeah. What we were chatting about, right, was, different areas have gotten hit through the years with different storms. And I mean, I know Florida's gotten hurricanes everywhere all the time, but there are certain areas that could be on some of these outer bands. Let's just take where I'm at. I'm south of Jacksonville in Ponte Vedra Beach. We haven't been hit by a major hurricane in a long time. If we get hit with some 70, 80, 90 mile an hour bands where we get those sustained winds, this area over here could have a lot more damage than, say, if Naples got hit again with a 120 mile an hour wind event, because all those roofs down there have been redone multiple times to the new codes, to the new standards, with better materials, with better application techniques, versus up here,
gotcha,
where things haven't been put on. Perfect example of that was when Michael hit Mexico Beach a few years back. When I was working that, there was areas where the homes had been torn down and rebuilt, and they were within like 4 or 5 years old, and they were right next to the area of these older homes. And when that hurricane came through, all of the newer homes that had been to the newer codes clearly held up a lot better than the ones that hadn't. And so it's the same thing with these wind bands as they pass through here. You'll get these gusts and they'll be in the outer sections. And if they sustain long enough, you can have damage, like I said, all the way over here on the East Coast, or shoot up into, I think, like Savannah or something like that. So the point with that too, it goes back to like what we talked about before, is to just be patient. Like driving down here and running out there and trying to chase around with storms, let it hit, let it subside, see what's what, drive it, see where actually the damage is. It's not always the best thing to go dive right into where the eye hit. And from what I know about that area where the eye hit, the shoreline there's not a whole ton a lot to want to go work there anyway. So.
And that's kind of what I wanted to hear from you, just like a little bit about like, so what do you call the armpit of Florida?
The crotch.
The crotch.
Yeah, the crotch, Big Ben. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like not, I mean, this is like for human life and all that, you know, like just people's lively, like their houses and stuff like that. Obviously, this is probably a better case scenario. You know, we're talking about less houses being destroyed. And honestly, man, I can have no problem rooting for that, right? Like I know that sometimes it's nice when there's damage, you know, whatever. But the point is like for me, I'm happy about that, right? I want us to kind of talk through that. So if it's hitting the crotch, there's less densely populated areas there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, of course. That area there, you know, once you get up like north of Tampa ways, you know, it kind of gets sparse up until you get up towards like Destin and all that. Right?
Yeah. And then it looks like, so that's Wednesday. It's hitting there. It's going inland, and then it's going to go through. It's going to hit some Georgia. There's a little bit of like, there's little storms that are happening around the edges. It sounds like there's what in the water would be called eddies, but there's little tornadoes that can spin off. It was a Cat 4 when it hit, which seems like heavy. Like it was like a Cat 2 last night, and then it hit with the Cat 4. And then into Friday, it's getting off land and into the ocean. And I never know how, I mean, maybe you know a little bit more about like how these, after they've been on land for a little while, they usually lose some steam, right? And then they get up, it's going to get up to the Carolinas. It's not going to have a ton of effect on houses on average.
Well, it just depends, right? This is the one thing to think about with the storm too, and it's another reason to be patient. Some of the best work that I've ever gotten off of hurricanes, this goes all the way back to, I mean, Ike, comes from the subsequent storms or the ancillary storms that are going on. And so, like when we were at Michael, that hurricane looked horrendous. I mean, it's still to me one of the worst, like as far as damage was and just destruction. I mean, it was massive. It was crazy. And then I remember going through it and tracking it, and we were in the helicopter and we were shooting over everything. And I started realizing, like, man, I went here. I know those trees are all supposed to be pushed that way, and these are supposed to be this way. Like I know how these things work, but they weren't. They were all over. And so what happens is you get wind wrapped tornadoes in these hurricanes, and people don't know they're there. And so that will start. And so like we had tornado warnings here all morning. I'm all the way on the other coast, right? Northeast side. And we've had tornado warnings all day. Those things start popping up, and all of a sudden you end up with all these little mini events all over the place, and they will push all the way. I mean, even after Hurricane Ike that hit Houston, right? Came in Galveston, came up to Houston. Ohio had some of the best damage. I say that as a roofer.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Excuse us.
So had some of the most amount of work that came from that storm as anywhere, and that's because that traveled up and it kept staying in the system. And by the time it got there, all that warm, moist air hit that cool depression air that came down, and it started pushing up into tornadoes and hailstorms there. And I mean, it bombed like Dayton and Columbus and all that stuff again.
I have a question too on that. Like, so talking to hail focused people up here in the Midwest, Dan Walrek is a guy that I've spent some time with, very solid residential sales guy, 18.5 million this past year, which is almost unheard of. I don't know. Have you heard of a guy that's sold more than 18.5 million on residential?
I've heard of people saying they've sold more than that, but this is the fish story world that we live in.
Okay, I know this guy's pretty damn legit. We sold 150 before lunch. I hung out with him. I was shadowing him. Anyways, he was talking to me about how like it gets really overpicked in the middle of the storm too. So his strategy is always perimeters. You know what I mean? He's going out to the edges of it. And it's like, maybe they need a little bit more help too with the insurance company, because the insurance company is just approving on site everything in the middle of the storm. And maybe they need a little bit more. And we talk about help, right? But like, do you think that that is kind of the similar principle that you're talking about? I know that there's offshoots of the storm. Do you think it kind of relates to what he's saying as well, where there's a little bit less roofers kind of sitting in there?
Well, I mean, what he's talking about is kind of working the like we call the fringe, right? So when a storm hits, you have the low hanging fruit, right, which is the worst damage. Nobody's denying anything. They're kind of like we used to call Stevie Wonder hail, right? Like anybody can get there and improve it. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So Helen Keller is buying this roof. But often guys who don't like to go in and compete into the heavy hit areas, which understandably so, they'll go out into those offshoot areas, like we call them the fringe areas, and they'll try to work that. The immediately following a storm, it can be advantageous. It can also be very detrimental in a sense to where if adjusters are keen and told to like, hey, here's what we're buying right now. They have their QA meetings and their adjuster meetings where they are basically told, hey, this is our criteria for what we're paying for. And if it's not there, don't buy it. And so if they're saying, hey, we need hail strikes through the mat and we need 15 a square regardless, or it's not passing QA and your claims are getting approved, those adjusters will go out to those marginal areas and say, hey man, call me in 3 months, call me in 6 months. They know the storm will spread like a ripple effect too, but they can't buy because an adjuster, the guy that goes out there, even though he gets paid on, a lot of them gets paid on what they buy, right? If they're independents, he has to have a criteria that he fits. So when he slides that file through, his boss looks at it and goes, okay, this is in our criteria.
Mm-hmm.
He goes out and starts looking at files and starts buying roofs that are 30, 40 miles outside the big bomb hail. And he starts sliding in some marginal stuff. His QA is going to say, he's going to kick it back. And then that guy's not going to get paid for his time working on that file. Mm-hmm. So there's a give and take to that. It has to be legit damage, and it has to be within the means of what they're paying for at that point. So yeah, I had a lot of guys, we used to run 100, 150 guys. I'd have guys like that. A big group of guys, herd would go into where, the big shit hit. And then a few guys would try to go out to these kind of fringe areas. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you spend 3, 4, 5 weeks building a book of business. The adjusters start coming out looking at it and they start saying, nah.
Yeah.
Maybe in 6 months we'll buy it, It's a risk, right? Risk and reward.
If you truly believe in what you're doing and you want to be the best version of yourself and you want to build a great organization, there's no other place to do that besides the Roofing Academy.
So let's talk about, what did we learn from like we already talked about it a little bit, but I want to cover it again. What did we learn from last time? What's different about the storm? What do you think will be different just based on like roofers' reactions here? Because hopefully some people learned some stuff, and this one was recent. Like there's usually a little, I don't know. Seems like there's a little bit more time in between these things sometimes.
I don't know. Lately, it feels like they're coming in waves. Yeah. I will say what I'm hoping that people learned is a little bit of patience. I do know a lot of people came down, went all in, and left with their tails between their legs. But I'm incredibly thankful for all those guys that there has been some really good hailstorms throughout the country. And there's a ton of work in Denver, and there's a ton of work up in Minneapolis and up in Chicago. And I know there's always work in Dallas, right? Probably hail by noon there again today. I know Atlanta's got a ton of work and all that stuff. I know guys up there are doing great. Like if you're going to make the jump, like come down funded and ready. And I'm hoping that if they can make their money up there and come down funded, they'll be okay if they decide to make that jump. That's the big thing for me. Like when we talk about storms and the way that things are, it is slow here. It's a slow burn. The idea of coming just to make fast money, of course, you can probably come down and tarp roofs. But again, in that area and where this is hitting, it's not Naples and it's not Ponte Vedra Beach, right? And so I don't know how many of these homeowners, depending on where it hits and where people go, have 5, 6, 8, 10 grand just to stroke a check. I mean, look at the houses that you're looking at as you're driving by here. I haven't surveyed the area. I don't know the logistics. I don't know the demographics as far as median home income and all that type of stuff there. But you got to look at it too. Somebody's got to pay you, or you got to wait for the carrier. So if you go out there and you rip through and you tarp 200, 300 houses, and these people aren't going to just stroke a check for it, you're going to have to wait on that money too. You got to pay the crews, right? The material is not really that expensive, or you can leave it on your lines, however you want to do it there. But you're going to have an expense in, and then you're going to have to wait to get paid even on that too, right? And then we got to look at one thing with that. If they don't buy the roof, or down here, you know, we have percentage deductibles, there's a big chunk of that money that comes out of that first check. So if you got a $4,000 or $5,000 tarp bill and the roof's only going to be 15 grand, if the house is a $400,000 house and a 2% deductible, 8 grand of that gets getting eat up right in your deductible check, right? So people have to be smart. You have to know the math. You have to know how things work, and you have to know, like, you know, what you're going in with, and what your cash flow is going to look like. So
absolutely. I want to invite people to ask questions. This is a unique podcast. We don't normally go live like this. So feel free to ask questions. Neither of us are weather experts. We can only look at the storm path here and make, you know, we're going to the crotch of Florida, and then also given Matt's extensive background in the area and what roofers have seen, what he's seen. So would love to invite you guys to ask questions. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll see if we can answer them for you. Otherwise, Matt, well, you know, what if this, you know, it doesn't look like it's going to be that crazy as far as, like, it's not going to be the last one. What was the last one called again? We did a whole podcast on it. Ian. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. We did a whole podcast on Ian, but, like, there's going to be less. It looks like there's going to be less damage if I had to guess, but we'll see. Just because, and then also you're talking about the demographics might be different, might be a little bit different, might be less free flow money on the homeowners that did get hit, which is, hey, that's part of what incentivizes the mad rush sometimes of people coming down. If you'd look at the companies, you know, you mentioned companies that were YOLOing their whole lives into Florida. What do you see as, like, there was some people that went out of business. We saw people that went out of business. We saw salespeople that got screwed. We saw companies that had a good market. I saw clients that had a good market lose their foothold in their current market and go down to Florida. There is consequences for making dumb decisions in this. It doesn't mean that you're not going to make some money. It's just try to make long-term decisions here as well, right? Like, don't lose your current market completely because you want to make some money here. That's something. Is there any other consequences that you saw? And then I want to end, with questions, but I also want to end with positive stuff too. But any other consequences that you saw that roofing companies experienced that weren't prepared or did this wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that you see with a lot of these guys, like we're talking about as far as consequences, right? If we're talking about on the negative side, is being that guys come down here, they want to make fast money. There becomes a point to where they get antsy. The sales guys, if they're not getting their commissions in it for 3, 4, 5 months because the roofs can't be built, or the claims are slow, the depreciation's slow, all that, much slower than what they're used to, at some point they want to go somewhere else and work. And if your company's not going to set up somewhere, you're probably going to lose those resources. That happens a lot down here. That happens a lot. And so Florida is a decision that if people are going to make, and what I would say from this, and I can speak from personal experience, if you're going to make the jump to come to Florida, don't plan on jumping back. And that doesn't mean that you can't keep your business elsewhere.
Yeah.
But I would come and plan on keeping a long-term foothold in Florida.
Yeah.
Number one, it makes a lot of sense because we're always going to have work. The money's good. And what I've said my entire career, started my 23rd year in this industry, anywhere where it's really hard to work and where it's difficult and where it's a pain in the ass and where you got to overcome obstacles and red tape and whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be immigration in North Dakota, like we dealt with in 2007, or it could be, insurance laws down here, like we dealt with this last year. Wherever it's very difficult to work, it will be a plus side to the profitability and the competition, right? So I choose to work where it is usually the most difficult to work. It thins the herd out of everybody just, being able to come in a truck and compete with you. And also it tends to drive the numbers up, right? So there's good consequences too, right? There's good results from it as well. So,
all right, we've got a live question here. I'm gonna go to Josh Henderson. He says, "What would be an adequate war chest number roofers should have set aside before making the trip there?" I would love you to take a shot at a real number, even though it's a intense question.
Yeah, I think for me that's kind of a loaded question in a sense to where. A couple things. If we're looking,
by the way, there's no consequences. If you haven't noticed on the real news, there's no consequences if you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Except for this person.
Yeah. It depends on, are you talking about as a roofing company owner or are you talking
I think that's what he's saying as a roofing company owner.
So then my follow-up would be, what's your overhead, right? So I guess as far as a factor is I would figure that you should have at least 6 months cash flow to run your normal overhead without ever having to put a penny in, and you'll be safe.
6 months.
So if your average payroll is 30 grand a week and your average overhead, drain is 20 grand a month, let's say that's, what would that be? 170 grand a month, multiply that by 6 and make sure you got that in the bank to come down here with. That'll give you a breather. I can tell you when I came down for the first time, I was very fortunate. I was coming off of a 2 huge years up in DC. We did like 51 million and 53 million. It cash flowed really, really well. My guys all came down here. They had all just made a ton of money for a couple years in a row. And as we were setting this storm up, all that money was cycling in from the last storms. So it was a good situation for us, except for, tile was 8 to 12 months out to build roofs. So I was very fortunate that I had that huge cash flush coming in to be able to kind of weather that cycle. But I think that for the average guy, I think if you could have about 6 months worth of actual overhead, that'll give you enough cushion and be safe to come down here and work.
I'll try to shout out your company too if you ask questions. Josh Henderson is from All American Roofing.
Cool.
And we've got another clip here. I'm just going to take a look at it. This is the landfall situation. So there's certainly going to be some roofs affected. I mean, it's interesting. For instance, my family had they're on Idalia.
Uh-huh.
Wait, is that the name of the
Isabel?
I'm trying to remember what the shit. Never mind. They're on a little island that was greatly affected. Patriot Roofing and Exteriors. Haha. Not sure where you got All American. No, sorry about that, Josh. But shout out to your company. What we saw, I'm trying to remember where my parents are, but they're putting on a metal roof. So it's interesting. People like kind of getting wise to this stuff where they're like, you know what, we're going to upgrade at this point just because it's really obnoxious replacing a roof.
Well, what you're seeing too is a lot of the folks are switching from tile to metal just because of the availability of it. And so it is very common to have a metal roof on a coastal home. You know what I mean? The look of it, the aesthetics of it. And we can slap a standing seam roof on right now, whereas some tile is still, a ways out. So we've seen a big push for that for sure.
I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. I would love it if a few more people, I see some people in here, please ask a couple questions to round this conversation out. But I want to end with a little bit of positivity. Besides the questions, feel free to ask positive or negative questions, but positivity around what have you seen as positive things that have happened since the last hurricane for the roofing community in Florida? What are some positive things?
So as far as for the roofing community, I think that it's caused people to be a little bit wiser, to actually be more of stewards of their business rather than being so, like you said, just kind of YOLO, just go in like cheese, right? Which always breeds a better business owner. It breeds smarter business owners, and of course, we always have guys that learn this and cycle off. And so I'm hoping that it continues on that type of path for the guys in this industry who spent some time down here to know that there is a more calculated and better way to run a business rather than just running off the seat of your pants, because ultimately it'll bring more security as far as professionalism for the client and security in their businesses and that. So I mean, like I said, pressure makes diamonds, right? So when guys come down here and they have to learn these ways and learn how to run in this business, they become better businessmen,
All right, everyone, if you could give this live stream a bunch of thumbs up and hearts, it would allow more people to see this. I think that this is a good message. Always a good message from you, Matt. I really appreciate you spending the time. Like I was saying in your comments the other day, I don't think, you don't have to do this. Like this, there's nothing about this that's like monetizable at the moment from what I understand for you. I'm going to welcome you to pitch something at, whatever you got going on at the end, but like, it's just very nice of you to spend the time to do this. And we really appreciate it. And I know that there's a lot of complexity with Florida and with the insurance stuff going on. So be careful, study up. This is just a reminder and an overview, but study up. If you're headed down there now, I know there's probably some cars on their way. There's probably some caravans on their way at the moment, some roofing caravans.
For sure.
And always, like I always want to say, people can shake a stick at roofing for being a little bit like, hey, not excited, but at least like interested in helping, right? But guess what? You need roofers. You need roofing salespeople. You need people to get the word out. You need people to help. From what I understand, if you're a homeowner right now, and if your home is affected, then you'd want to get that kind of rolling quick, especially with the amount of time that it takes to get in queues, to get through the insurance process that gets a little overbearing sometimes during situations like this. So the sooner the better. And I would say, obviously, just being smart about this stuff. So study up. Don't take this as your full primer, of course. But Matt, what can you direct people to? Just so I want to give you a chance to plug your stuff here.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. No, I enjoy coming on here, and I enjoy this industry's given a lot to me. So it's nice to just offer guys a little bit of that information, hopefully steer them away from anything that could affect them in a negative way. If anybody needs any help or has questions, they're welcome to PM me. Anybody who knows me or has known me for a long time knows I'm always willing to take a question and help another guy out, or if they need help down here, we're available. We're always willing to work something.
And we'll tag him in this live video, so you can comment beneath here too. And I'm sure Matt over the next day or two could get to those questions as well. Yep. Really appreciate everyone watching. Godspeed and good luck as you are out there. Stay safe, and grateful for all the courage of the roofing community as it pushes into things like this and helps homeowners and property owners. So really appreciate everyone out there, and grateful for this industry as well. And the podcast is put on by hookagency.com, Hook Agency all over social. Have an amazing day.